Welcome back everyone. So, following the very positive feedback from my Grotty F1 Season 3 recap video, it's time to move on to the second of this three-part mini-series, where I'm recapping the three main championships that I took part in during the second half of 2019. This video will be a complete roundup of the second season of Speky's Team Endurance Championship, a GTA Online racing championship that took place every Friday from July to August 2019, hosted by, well, pretty obviously, DaSpekyLegend. This video will be showcasing the championship from my point of view and will showcase the highlights of each of the races that I competed in. So, having competed in the GT2 class for the Chihuahua Hot Dogs racing team in the first season of this championship, hosted from August to September 2018, and having done quite well, finishing 5th out of the 12 in class and finishing on the podium in all three of the rounds I raced in, I was very excited for the return of this championship and I was very eager to do well. There were several changes to the championship for this season. The number of GTs had increased from 2 to 3 and the number of teams had decreased from 6 to 4, with 6 drivers, 2 in each GT, racing in each team. In addition, some teams were abolished and new ones added. I was part of the Myopia racing team for this season, with our GT1 drivers being DaSpekyLegend and Spear 97, our GT2s being myself and Horizon Jets, and our GT3s being Tom 22 and Denim Pug. So, with 4 teams of 6 racers signed up, it was time for round 1. Round 1 featured sports cars around higher stakes by Speky, with GT1 in the Feltzer, GT2 in the Alpha, and GT3 in the Furora GT. Being the first round of the championship, and with half of the GT field needing reserves for this round, I knew I could achieve a good result if I put the practice in. The predetermined grid order put me 3rd on the grid. I had a decent launch and a well-timed mid-drive saw me up into 2nd ahead of my teammate's reserve driver. Later into the lap, a slightly missed braking point from the leader saw him unluckily hit the fence on the corner exit and fly upwards. I was initially worried that this incident was my fault via lag, but I was told not to wait, so I continued. And from there, there's not really much I can say about this race. After getting into the lead on the first lap, my good pace, coupled with some very consistent driving and good dealings with other GTs, meant that 26.5 laps and a pit stop later, I pulled out a 38-second lead on 2nd place, and only finished a few seconds behind the last place GT1. Pretty much one of the most solid drives I've done. I unfortunately missed out on fastest lap by the tiniest of margins for that extra bonus point. Things didn't go quite so well for the rest of my team, and we finished round 1 in last place in the team's championship. However, there was still a long way to go. Round 2 featured coupes around St Parker Street Circuit by Jack, with GT1 in the Felon, GT2 in the F620, and GT3 in the Oracle. Because this championship took place during the summer, my schedule was far less predictable than it normally is, and I was unfortunately away for this round, meaning I had to get a reserve. My reserve for this round was Bros, who didn't put in the best of performances, finishing in 2nd to last place, even being beaten by a couple of GT3s. Of course, that type of thing tends to happen when you don't take a championship seriously, and you haven't slept for 26 hours before the start of a race. He did stream this race, but I remember turning it off 15 minutes into it. Plus, because it's been the best part of half a year, the Twitch VOD no longer exists. There is also no surviving footage from any of the GT2 perspectives for this round. The only footage that I could find that contains my reserve at all are these 2 clips kindly lent to me by one of my GT3 teammates, Tom. Overall, this round wasn't great for both my individual drivers and team's championship hopes. I moved down to 3rd place in GT2, with Snapey picking up the win and fastest lap in the race. Another poor round from nearly all drivers, apart from Jets finishing 2nd in GT2, saw the gap to 3rd place in the team's championship widen, as we stayed in last place. Round 3 was in muscles around Sanchiansky Loop by Deadshot, and saw my return to the championship. GT1 was in the regular Dominator, GT2 was in the Gauntlet, and GT3 was in the Ellie. I wanted a good result this round to put me back in the running for the GT2 championship, so I put in a decent amount of practice for this round, as I'd done with round 1. My predetermined grid position put me in last place on the grid. However, the other 3 drivers in the top 4 in the GT2 championship also started in the second half of the grid. I had a good launch followed by a very solid mid-drive, however I was blocked off, losing me some momentum. A good run a few corners later meant I could squeeze my way between two cars, gaining positions from both. I then went around the outside of 5th place, and after a couple of very close corners, I managed to get a good run onto the straight and keep the position. The next lap, a mistake from 3rd, as well as my 4th place teammate accidentally moving across too late, forcing him to give me the position, saw me into the podium places. The next lap, one of the top 2 pitted, moving me up to 2nd. For the next few laps, I drove well so that I could overcut him later into the race. On lap 8, a mistake from the leader gave me 1st place on track. I gained a position from a random who was spectating, causing one of the GT1s to disconnect. Nearly 30 minutes after gaining the lead and we were on to the final lap. I had been defending from a much faster 2nd place Speky for a good few laps, and our battling had allowed my 3rd place teammate to catch a decent margin to be right on the back of us. This was a 3-way battle for the win on the final lap of the race. Jets had managed to overtake Speky in the stunt prop section and had the run going down the hill. He tried to sneak up the inside of the sweeping left, but was forced to back out of it, compromising his momentum and position into the braking zone. Speky managed to sneak up the inside and a small gap opened up, leaving me to cruise around the final few corners and win my 2nd race of the season. The last few laps of that race were incredibly tense, and I couldn't be happier with how I drove. I didn't have the all-out lap time, but I managed to make the race strategy work. That race was probably my highlight of the season and brought me right back into the GT2 fight. Unfortunately, this is where my championship starts to get a bit depressing. As I said for round 2, my summer schedule is very unpredictable and busy, meaning that I was abroad for rounds 4, 5 and 6, essentially putting an end to my championship hopes. Nevertheless, I managed to get reserves for all 3 of these rounds, so I can still run you through how those races played out. Round 4 featured race car supers around Dell's stunt recreation of Blaine County 24-hour, originally by Brophy, with GT1 in the RE7B, GT2 in the Tyrus, and GT3 in the ETR1. I actually originally thought I could make this round, so I put in a decent number of laps, and I actually had some really strong pace. My best lap in practice would have made me the 2nd fastest in the race. My reserve for this round was Joe, and he put in a very respectable performance to finish 4th in GT2. Thanks to Faruja for this footage. Round 5 featured sports classics around Killamore by Bros, with GT1 in the Cheetah Classic, GT2 in the Sylvestra, and GT3 in the 190Z. This is a track that I've done a lot of racing on, including Children of the Mountain, so I imagine I would have done well in this round as well. Joe stepped into the reserve seat once again and put in yet another very solid performance, finishing 3rd behind Speky and Jets. Round 6 featured regular supercars around Arcadia's City Circuit by Jedi, with GT1 in the Zentorno, GT2 in the T20 and GT3 in the Entity XF. I actually really thought I would be able to make this round, to the point where I'd actually bought the car, which shows how sure I was considering how much of a cheapskate I normally am, and put in a fair amount of practice laps. And while I wasn't quite on the pace of Speky, who by now was leading the championship by a long way, I think I would have done well. Because of the short notice, Joe wasn't available to reserve as he'd been assigned to someone else earlier that week, so my reserve was Frozen Gamer. Unfortunately, I can't tell you a lot about his race because he disconnected, earning just a single point. Even more unfortunately, Speky disconnected that race as well, while Jets picked up a solid 2nd place for the team, meaning that if Frozen hadn't disconnected, I actually would have still been well in the championship fight going into the final round. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be, and now my main focus for round 7, which I would actually be there for, was to finish ahead of those behind me and secure 3rd place in GT2. The 7th and final round of the season took place around Michelangelo by Street in Sports Rally. GT1 was in the Kuruma, GT2 in the Tropos Rally, and GT3 in the Omnis. Now, as a general rule of thumb, my rallying is worse than my circuit racing, but around most tracks I can do fairly well. Take for example last season's rally round, where I finished second in class. However, this track really exposed my weaknesses and I was really struggling to find good long run pace in practice. To be challenging for the win, I'd have to hope for others to make some mistakes. I was placed last on the grid once again, and I didn't get the best launch. However, the close proximity of cars into the first corners meant some had to slow, meaning I could carry the speed between the two Globe Oil cars and move up to 6th. A couple of corners later, my 5th place teammate unfortunately hit a terrible hitbox, gaining me another position. Later round the lap, a nice slingshot over the corner crest allowed me to make 2 more overtakes, moving me into the podium positions. On the following sweeping left-hander, Ferrugia made a mistake to move up to 2nd. Not a bad opening lap. Several laps later, I put in some good sectors to catch up to the leader, and I overtook him going into the hairpin. I really didn't expect to be leading this race. I held the position for another 10 minutes or so before taking my mandatory pit stop, after which I dropped down to 3rd in class. A lap later, I gained a position to a disconnection in GT1. Another lap later, and I overtook GT1 driver Charlie, who was definitely not having a good race. A few corners later, I gained another position from yet another disconnection. The next lap, I capitalised on Snape's mistake to move me back up to 2nd in GT2. I held this position for another 10 minutes before gaining another by overtaking my GT1 teammate and host, Speky, who, like Charlie, was obviously not having a good time. If the Tropos was difficult around this track, I can only imagine what the Kuruma was like. A lap later, I finally lost my 2nd place to Snapey, before overtaking yet another GT1 with issues a few corners later, moving me up to 5th overall. After being overtaken, I started to drop back from Snapey and Jets, who had their own battle for the lead. I just didn't have the pace nor really the consistency, and I contented myself with 3rd place, which was still a great result, and continued my streak of never not finishing on the podium in any of the STEC races that I have competed in across both seasons. So, there we have it. All 7 races have been run and done. Now it's time for the final standings. In GT1, it was Oh That Design of the Princess Robot Bubblegum team taking the championship, with Globe Oil's R2XDJ in 2nd and Menace of Smoke on the Water Racing in 3rd. My GT1 teammates Speky and Spear came in 4th and 6th respectively. In GT3, it was a 1-2 for Princess Robot Bubblegum, with Recited and Libra taking 1st and 2nd respectively, and SJ Appleby of Globe Oil coming home for 3rd. My teammates Tom22 and Denim Pug ended the championship in 6th and 8th places respectively. Now, for the one that matters, for me anyway. After winning all but one of the races that he finished, Snapey took the GT2 championship by a healthy margin over my teammate Horizon Jets in 2nd. My 3 podiums plus the solid reserve performances by Joe meant that I managed to hold on to 3rd place. In the team standings, Princess Robot Bubblegum unsurprisingly retained their team's championship title with a very strong performance across all 3 GTs throughout the season. Globe Oil came in a comfortable 2nd place, and after a few dismal rounds from Smoke on the Water Racing, especially in round 4 when both their GT2 drivers disconnected, Myopia Racing managed to overtake them for 3rd. Good job to all teams who raced across the season. So, with the season over, it was time for reflection. It was a huge shame that I could only attend 3 of the 7 races in the season, as I think I could have definitely been in the mix to challenge for the GT2 championship, especially considering my very good performances in the rounds that I did race in. The championship just came at the wrong time, and it seems that no matter how good you do in the races that you can make, if you're only there for less than half the championship, you can't really be too surprised when you don't do as well as you hoped. There hasn't been any news at time of recording, but personally I hope that this championship will return in the future for a 3rd season. I've been so close to doing really well in both seasons that I've raced in, but factors beyond my control have always seemed to get in the way. I guess that's how it is sometimes. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you're continuing to enjoy this type of video format. We've got one more championship to go, and it's the one that I'm most looking forward to making, Children of the Mountain Season 5. So stay tuned for that, coming very soon to this channel. And look out for many more videos on this channel very soon. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed and want to see more of this type of content. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.